In this module, we will understand monitoring for program and policy ecosystems. But before we do that, let us take a quick look at the factors that distinguish monitoring and evaluation from one another. We can define monitoring as being an ongoing, continuous, routine process of data collection. On the other hand, evaluation is the systematic collection of data at specific intervals. Monitoring requires track changes in the program over time to simultaneously make corrective actions. Evaluation answers whether the intended results were achieved and attribution of factors that contributed to the results of the program, which may have led to the outcomes. Monitoring ensures the linking of activities to the objectives and resources, whereas to conduct an evaluation, a special study design is required. Monitoring is an activity always undertaken by an internal team concerned with the collection of data, while evaluation is undertaken by an external team or a group of experts for data collection and outcome assessments. The process of monitoring enables managers to be reported on the progress and simultaneously alerts them to rising problems. In terms of evaluation, it provides lessons, highlights program potential, and offers recommendations for improvement. We can now move on to discussing monitoring on its own. Let us first define it. Monitoring is the process of regularly observing or documenting the actions occurring within a project. We can also understand it as the process of keeping track of how project activities are doing through deliberate and methodical observation. It involves giving feedback about the progress of the project to the donors, implementers, and beneficiaries of the project. It is an important part of effective management because it can provide early and ongoing information to help shape implementation in advance of evaluations. Some examples that evaluators use for a program are semi-structured interviews, focus group discussions, surveys, and questionnaires. By using a combination of these methods, evaluators can collect comprehensive data about a program and assess it effectively for further improvement and program implementation. The monitoring process can be divided into 5 important parts of its successful completion. The first is initiation. This stage of monitoring involves creating the project's outline. In this phase, high-level decisions are made regarding the purpose, feasibility, and determining what is needed for the project and other factors like the establishment of the team and stakeholders of the project. Second is planning. During planning, the scope and details of the program that must be carried out throughout execution are made. It is common to identify the project risks that could potentially hinder the progress during this stage. Third is executing. It entails carrying out all of the tasks listed in the planning phase. The order of the project's activities is decided during this stage, which may depend on the project's scope, any corrective actions, goals, etc. Fourth is closing. This phase comprises completing the project strategy, informing stakeholders, securing acceptance of project deliverables, and documenting the lessons learned throughout the project. Fifth is control and monitoring. This phase involves ensuring that the project is on the right track and that all the tasks are completed in a defined manner. This is done through observation of the project after project implementation, identifying the risks and problems, and deploying a mitigation strategy to control the new process. Since we have understood the distinguishing factors of monitoring and evaluation, let us now move on to discussing monitoring frameworks used in the process. A monitoring framework provides the means for determining if a person is on the right track to achieve its objectives. It should be designed to monitor quality at different levels and for different groups. Monitoring frameworks draw on a number of different tools and components to collect and organize data needed to monitor a program's performance. Monitoring should occur both at the individual and program level. An effective monitoring plan should provide answers to several questions such as: which indicators should be measured to determine what was done, how well it was done, and what was achieved? The indicator should be directly related to the expected outcome or goal. Who will collect this data and how will it be collected? This will indicate the institution or individuals responsible for the collection and the tools to be used, like checklists, forms, or surveys. How will the data flow from the locations of data collection to the stakeholders? Who will check the data quality, conduct the data analysis, draft reports, and make decisions based on the data? How will this data be managed to be accessible to those who need it? To understand the elements of a monitoring framework and how it is used, let us look at the types of monitoring frameworks. As discussed by Hutto, there are 4 basic types of monitoring that can be readily distinguished based on the nature of questions designed to address. Number 1. Surveillance monitoring. It is defined as the systematic ongoing collection, collation, and analysis of data and the timely dissemination of information to those who need to know so that action can be taken. Second is implementation monitoring, which is also known as outcome monitoring. It ensures that the program maintains fidelity to its design and helps mitigate threats to internal validity. Third is effectiveness monitoring. This type of monitoring addresses the question of how successful a project ultimately is at restoring the ecosystem or component parts. Fourth is ecological effects monitoring. It is defined as the observation of processes and indicators that shape ecosystem dynamics and structures, leading to knowledge of how ecosystems work, indicators of ecological integrity, and how they may be managed based on modeling. The 4 types of monitoring can be understood with the help of the diagram below, which explains the nature of questions involved in each type of monitoring and how it can fit into a broader adaptive management loop. If land management agencies are intending to conduct adaptive management, they will fund and seek partnerships to conduct each of the 4 types of monitoring as mentioned above. Within this framework, we will be able to understand each type. Knowledge of current land conditions emerges from the surveillance monitoring results to identify any changes over time. If current conditions seem undesirable, then the remedy may require on-the-ground activity, where things are actually happening. This will require implementation, effectiveness, and ecological effects monitoring to be conducted for the system. The starting point for the conceptual model is given in the clouds in the diagram, such as assessing the existing condition and seeing if it is okay or unknown, and what are its problematic areas, or if it needs any changes. These starting points indicate the current condition of resources, as determined through surveillance monitoring or some other kind of assessment. As seen in the diagram, implementation monitoring will be necessary to determine whether the stakeholders funded the project to be done according to the intended outcomes. Effectiveness monitoring will be necessary to determine whether the activity achieved the explicitly stated short-term and long-term goals. Lastly, ecological effects monitoring will be necessary to determine whether there were any unintended consequences that threaten the long-term ecological sustainability and biological diversity of the entire system. The arrows in between the box and the clouds indicate the results of each kind of monitoring. These results are then taken forward for discussion with the management during an annual adaptive management meeting. Here, the involved stakeholders meet with various monitoring group leaders to discuss the program questions and results. Now let us understand each type of monitoring and how they perform based on the nature of the program, beginning with surveillance monitoring. It is a method of making repeated standardized surveys so that the changes can be detected. It also uncovers and tracks the direction and magnitude of trends. Through repeated surveys over time, this type of monitoring enables the understanding of the flow of activities or behavior, which enables probable future trends. An example can be the systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of data from time to time to bring out ways to prevent and cure diseases in remote areas. Let us now move on to the next type of monitoring called implementation monitoring. It is a type of monitoring that requires the researcher to understand the effect of a program if it has been implemented as designed. For example, we can assess whether the program reached the correct participants, the correct time, quality, or quantity. This ensures that the aspects of the program have been implemented correctly and the positive effects of the program are showing. Through this approach, the evaluators are able to avoid any incorrect conclusions or implementation of the program. There are certain indicators that are used to monitor when it comes to implementation monitoring, such as availability, uptake, quality, fidelity, and compliance, depending on the study or program. Since we have understood how implementation monitoring is used as a monitoring framework, how about we understand the context and complexity of monitoring? When we talk about the context and complexity of monitoring, we must talk about its type, which include performance, context, and complementary monitoring. Performance monitoring can be understood as the measurement of the ongoing and systematic collection of performance indicator data and other quantitative or qualitative information to reveal whether implementation is on track and whether expected results are being achieved. In context monitoring, the researcher collects information about conditions and external factors that are relevant to the implementation and performance of a project undertaken. Context and performance monitoring are used to supplement complementary monitoring. This involves a complexity-aware approach to predict the probable changes to the program. Let us now understand how context monitoring can be undertaken for a study. Context monitoring tracks the overall setting in which the project operates, and therefore is often called situation monitoring. It is used to supplement the complexity-aware monitoring approaches, helping to answer several questions that are often missing or unpredictable in the program. There are four major approaches that are used in complexity-aware monitoring, which are developed to integrate with or build upon the traditional M&E systems. They are social network analysis, sentinel indicators, contribution analysis, and most significant changes. The diagram on the left shows the social agreement technical certainty matrix. As shown in this diagram, simple problems are those in which stakeholders have a common goal of solving the existing problem and they are highly aware of the causes and solutions pertaining to the problem. There are two ways to understand the complicated problems. There can be a high level of social agreement but low technical certainty, or there can be a low social agreement but high technical certainty. In terms of complex problems, it is where there are low levels of both technical certainty and social agreement about an issue. To present you with a clear picture of how context and performance monitoring work, let us look at the given diagram. The boxes consist of the key functions of process evaluation and relations among them that determine the nature of the investigation. It also enables us to determine and interpret the outcomes. Now the question arises, what to monitor? Monitoring can be based on the four factors of reach, context, fidelity, and equity. Each of these factors include the key pointers that must be considered when the researcher monitors a program. Under the reach factor, we need to consider things like the number of units delivered or the number of service delivery points that are operational and the time for service delivery. When we look at the context of monitoring, we are basically looking at the effects of external factors and internal factors on service delivery, any adaptations made to it, along with the feedback from the beneficiaries. In terms of monitoring fidelity, we need to bring forth details of the number of units delivered that comply with the set benchmarks, along with the events planned and the average time for an event. And lastly, in terms of equity, we need to take care to note the type of beneficiaries that were serviced, the spatial distribution of service delivery, and consumer feedback. It is crucial to understand how a project can be managed effectively and efficiently using the Management Information System, which we will now discuss in detail through web-based and mobile-based Management Information System. Web-based MIS is a software that uses online technology to function and must include comprehensive project management tools such as broad project planning, command over the execution, data analysis, etc. The web-based MIS aids in establishing a broad level of control over the project's objectives and in assessing their success. In contrast to web-based MIS, we have the mobile-based MIS, which is more accessible due to the prevalence of mobile infrastructures, offering more bandwidth and consistent connectivity. End-user terminals are often wirelessly connected and easily portable in space, which are then used to access information resources and services. Since we have understood the concepts of the types of monitoring and the components of what to monitor, let us focus on understanding what the theory of systemic change means. The theory of systemic change refers to the comprehensive approach of transforming social systems, organizations, or communities to create long-term sustainable changes. This theory underscores the notion that any noticeable shift in a given system arises from interconnected and dynamic forces that interact with each other in a complex and intersecting manner. The concept of systemic change has emerged to fill gaps in traditional M&E frameworks. The process involves the identification of the root causes of problems, followed by the design and implementation of interventions that target the entire system, rather than just individual components. The inwards-out process monitors the program performance by acknowledging the internal change that must occur before the external change can be sustained. This contributes to the program's success or failure. This involves looking inward and reflecting on the design, implementation, and outcomes of a system in order to assess whether it aligns with the overall goals of bringing about systemic change. It requires introspection and self-reflection to gain a better understanding of the system and its impact. Through this perspective, the evaluators can examine the internal perspective and identify the changes required and develop strategies to overcome these constraints that hinder the overall progress. The outwards-in process involves looking outwardly at the external factors that impact the working of the program. This process focuses on understanding the needs and wants of stakeholders outside of the program and how their desired outcomes interact with the internal workings of the program. By examining it from this perspective, evaluators can identify opportunities for leveraging external resources, building partnerships, and influencing policy or institutional change that can facilitate systemic change.